The HOA threatened my 15 cabins, but they forgot who owned the road. It started with a black SUV pulling into my driveway and a woman holding a clipboard like she already owned my land. I was repairing a porch on one of my 15 lake cabins when the HOA president informed me I owed nearly $100,000 and that my entire property now belonged under HOA authority. The strange part wasn't the threat. It was how confident she sounded. Because while she was talking about liens, fines, and taking control of my cabins, she was standing on something her board had never bothered to investigate. And before this was over, 96 homeowners, a courtroom full of witnesses, and one forgotten document would change everything. If you enjoy stories where patience beats power and paperwork beats arrogance, subscribe and stick around. This one only gets crazier from here. The first thing I heard was gravel crunching faster than it should have. I was kneeling on the porch of cabin 4, replacing a loose section of railing before the weekend guests arrived. Summer bookings had been strong, and I liked making sure every cabin looked right before people checked in. The lake stretched out behind me, calm and bright. Across the water, fishing boats were already moving. Then I heard the vehicle. Most people slowed down when they reached the wooden sign at the entrance to my property. Private road. Lake cabin guests only. This one didn't. A black SUV came around the bend and rolled straight up the drive like it owned the place. I stood and wiped sawdust from my hands. The driver's door opened. Brenda Whitmore stepped out. I recognized her immediately. Everyone around the lake knew who she was. President of the Lakeside Ridge HOA, head of every committee, the woman whose name seemed to appear on every warning letter, every complaint, every new rule the subdivision created. She wore a navy blazer despite the heat and carried a thick clipboard under one arm. 2 men climbed out behind her. One carried a camera, the other held a folder. Neither looked interested in introducing themselves. They immediately started photographing the cabin, the porch, the dock, the roof, the parking area. One of them even took pictures of the trash enclosure. I watched for a moment. Then I said, "Can I help you?" Brenda smiled. It wasn't a friendly smile. It was the kind of smile people use when they've already decided how a conversation ends. "Mr. Walker," she said, "I'm glad we found you." The man with the camera snapped another photo. "Found me?" I asked. I wasn't hiding. Her smile tightened. "We're here regarding multiple violations." She pulled several papers from the clipboard. Without asking permission, she walked onto the porch and pushed them into my chest. I took them. The top page had bright orange lettering across the top. Notice of non-compliance. I didn't react. Brenda seemed disappointed by that. "Effective immediately," she continued. "All 15 of your rental cabins fall under Lakeside Ridge Homeowners Association jurisdiction." The sentence hung in the air. I looked down at the paper, then back at her. "No, they don't." One of the men laughed quietly. Brenda didn't. According to the board's recent interpretation of the governing documents, properties surrounding community access lakefront areas are subject to HOA oversight. "Community access?" I repeated. "Correct." I glanced toward the lake, then toward the road, then back at her. Neither belonged to the HOA, but I didn't say that. Not yet. Brenda continued. "You have failed to submit architectural approvals, rental compliance registrations, property use disclosures, and annual association dues." She flipped a page. "The current amount owed is $98,400. The number was so absurd I almost laughed. Almost. Instead, I asked, $98,000 for what? Back dues, penalties, administrative assessments, and compliance fees. The second man handed her another document. She showed it to me like evidence in a trial. If payment is not received within 30 days, the HOA will proceed with liens against all structures on the property. I looked past her toward the cabins. 15 buildings, my father's work, my grandfather's land, decades of effort. And this woman was talking about taking them with paperwork she had printed that morning. The old irritation rose in my chest. Not anger. Something colder. Something familiar. The feeling of being underestimated. My father used to say that some people mistake silence for weakness. I had spent most of my life letting them make that mistake. Brenda seemed convinced she was dealing with another easy target. "We're trying to avoid litigation," she said. The man with the camera photographed my face. That annoyed me more than the notice. "You should stop doing that." He lowered the camera. Brenda ignored the exchange. "All we need is your cooperation." "And if I don't cooperate?" Her answer came instantly. "We'll take legal action." The confidence in her voice caught my attention, not because it impressed me, because it sounded rehearsed, like she'd been preparing this conversation for weeks, maybe months. I looked at the paperwork again. Lots of references to HOA bylaws, lots of references to board authority. Not much else. No survey references, no recorded easements, no property descriptions, nothing tied to actual ownership. Interesting. Very interesting. Behind Brenda, another vehicle appeared on the road. A pickup truck. Jake Turner, my foreman. He slowed when he saw the SUV, then parked and stepped out. His eyes moved from Brenda to the papers in my hand. "Everything okay?" he asked. Brenda answered before I could. "That depends on Mr. Walker." Jake looked at me. I gave a slight shrug. He understood immediately. "Watch. Listen, say nothing." Brenda pointed toward the cabins. "These structures will be reviewed individually." Then she pointed toward the road. "And we'll need documentation regarding access infrastructure." That sentence landed differently. I didn't let it show. But I noticed it. Access infrastructure. The road. Interesting choice of words. Very interesting. Brenda handed me one final page. "You have 30 days. Then she turned and walked back toward the SUV. The two men followed. One took a final photograph of cabin 4 before climbing inside. The engine started. Moments later, the vehicle disappeared down the drive. Jake watched it go. Neither of us spoke for several seconds. Finally, he looked at me. "You worried?" I stared at the dust settling over the road. The same road Brenda had just driven down. The same road every homeowner in Lakeside Ridge used every single day. The same road my father spent years protecting. Slowly, I folded the notice and slipped it into my pocket. "No," I said. Jake frowned. "They just threatened to put liens on 15 cabins." "I know. You owe them $98,000? I almost smiled. "No." He waited. I looked toward the road again. Toward a memory I hadn't thought about in years. Toward something locked away in a metal box inside the ranch house. Something my father had made me promise never to lose. Jake followed my gaze. "What are you thinking?" I watched the empty road for another moment. Then I said the only thing that mattered. "I think Brenda Whitmore just made a very expensive mistake. And for the first time that morning, I wanted to know whether the HOA had ever bothered to read the document my father spent 30 years protecting. Because if they hadn't, they were about to learn exactly who owned the only road in." Jake stood beside me for another moment, watching the dust settle where Brenda's SUV had disappeared. "What document?" he finally asked. I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I folded the orange notice once more and slipped it into my shirt pocket. "The kind people forget exists," I said. Then I headed toward the ranch house. The metal box was exactly where I'd left it. Back corner of my office, beneath an old drafting table. Gray steel. Fireproof. Heavy enough that nobody ever moved it unless they had a reason. I hadn't opened it in years. Not because I'd forgotten about it. Because I'd never needed to. My father believed in paperwork the way some people believe in religion. Every survey, every permit, every property tax receipt, every agreement. Everything went into that box. I unlocked it and lifted the lid. The familiar smell of old paper drifted out. Folders filled the interior from front to back, neatly labeled: road, lake, cabins, utilities, boundaries. My father had written every label himself. For the next hour I sat at my desk, sorting through documents while sunlight moved slowly across the floor. The first folder contained property surveys dating back almost 40 years. The second contained permits for the cabins. The third held tax records. Then I found the folder I was looking for. Road Access Agreement. The handwriting on the tab was faded but unmistakable. My father's. I pulled it free. The folder was thinner than I remembered, only a handful of pages. Yet somehow it felt heavier than everything else in the box. I opened it carefully. Inside sat a typed agreement dated 31 years earlier. There were signatures, witnesses, county recording information, and a legal description covering the entire access road connecting Lakeside Ridge to the state highway. I read the first page, then the second. By the time I reached the last page, I was smiling, not because the situation was funny, because it was worse than I thought. For Brenda. Much worse. I picked up the phone. There was only one person I trusted to look at this before I made a move. Martha Collins, retired county surveyor, 72 years old, sharp as broken glass. She answered on the third ring. Ethan. Martha. You busy? What kind of question is that? The kind that means I need help. A pause. Then she laughed. Now I'm interested. An hour later, she walked into my office carrying a leather folder and reading glasses. I handed her the agreement. She sat down and began reading. For several minutes, the room stayed quiet except for pages turning. Then she stopped, went back, read one section again, and her expression changed. That got my attention. Martha almost never reacted to documents. What? I asked. She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she read the next page, then the next. Finally, she removed her glasses. Where did you get this? My father. I know that. Where did he get it? It was signed when the subdivision was built. Martha stared at the agreement, then at me, then back at the agreement. Oh, Brenda is going to hate this. I leaned forward. What are you seeing? She tapped a paragraph halfway down the page. This isn't an easement. I noticed. Most subdivisions relied on easements, permanent access rights, something that ran with the land forever. This wasn't that. Martha shook her head slowly. No, this is something very different. I felt tension tightening across my shoulders. Different how? She pointed to another section. Because whoever drafted this agreement knew exactly what they were doing. I moved around the desk and stood beside her. Together we read the paragraph. Once, then twice, then a third time. The language was old, formal, specific, and dangerous, especially for anyone who assumed the road belonged to them. Martha sat back in her chair. Does Brenda know this exists? No. You sure? I'd bet every cabin on it. That earned the first genuine smile I'd seen from her all afternoon. She closed the folder carefully. Ethan, If the HOA had reviewed this before sending those notices, they never would have come up your driveway. The room went quiet. Outside, a truck passed along the road. The same road every resident of Lakeside Ridge used. The same road Brenda had driven down less than 3 hours earlier. I looked at the agreement again. One paragraph. Just a few lines. But those lines changed everything. "What would you do?" I asked. Martha considered the question. Then she gave an answer that surprised me. "Nothing." "Nothing?" "Not yet." She tapped the orange notice sticking out of my shirt pocket. "People who think they already own something tend to make mistakes." I understood immediately. Brenda thought she had authority. The board thought they had leverage, and confident people often pushed too far. Martha stood and slid the agreement back into the folder. "Let them keep talking." "Why?" "Because every time they put something in writing, they'll tell you exactly how much trouble they're in." She headed toward the door, then stopped, one hand resting on the frame. "Ethan." I looked up. For the first time all afternoon, Martha seemed genuinely uneasy. Not worried for me. Worried for the HOA. "Whatever happens next," she said quietly, "make copies of everything." I frowned. "You think it'll get that serious?" She nodded, then looked back toward the folder. Toward the agreement. Toward the paragraph neither of us could stop thinking about. "Oh, I know it will." And as the front door closed behind her, I sat alone in the office staring at the document. Because hidden inside that forgotten agreement was a clause that could change the future of every single home in Lakeside Ridge. The question wasn't whether Brenda Whitmore would discover it. The question was how much damage she would do before she did. The answer started arriving 3 days later. A white envelope appeared in my mailbox. Then another. Then another. Every one of them carried the Lakeside Ridge HOA logo. The first demanded architectural compliance forms for all 15 cabins. The second required registration fees for every rental unit. The third threatened penalties for failure to comply with community standards. I spread them across my desk beside the road agreement. The stack was growing, exactly the way Martha predicted. Every letter claimed authority. Every letter assumed jurisdiction. Every letter gave me something new to save. I started a file. By the end of the week, the folder was already half full. Meanwhile, Brenda kept escalating. 2 HOA inspectors appeared at Cabin 7 on Friday morning. Jake called me as soon as he saw them. "They're taking pictures again." "Let them." "You sure?" "Get photos of them while they work." There was a pause. Then Jake laughed. "Now you're thinking like your father." 20 minutes later, my phone buzzed. Images started arriving. Inspectors photographing porches. Inspectors measuring stair railings. Inspectors writing notes. Inspectors standing on private property without permission. I saved every picture, then created a second backup. The following Monday, things got worse. Or better, depending on how you looked at it. A family from Idaho called to cancel their reservation. Then another group from Spokane. Then a retired couple who had stayed at my cabins every summer for 6 years. The reason was always the same. Someone from the HOA had contacted them. According to Brenda, legal action was pending against the property. Potential guests should reconsider their reservations. By Tuesday afternoon, I had lost nearly $12,000 in bookings. Jake was furious. I wasn't. The money bothered me. The interference interested me. Because every cancellation left a trail. Emails, phone records, witnesses, documents. The kind of evidence people create when they get careless. And Brenda was becoming very careless. That Thursday, Maria Santos arrived at my office carrying a folder. Maria had cleaned cabins for me for almost a decade. Reliable, observant, and completely unimpressed by HOA politics. 3 people asked me about the fines today, she said. What fines? She handed me the folder. Inside were printed screenshots from the neighborhood Facebook group. Brenda had been posting updates, public updates. She was discussing my property, my cabins, my business, my supposed violations, without mentioning a single actual law. Just HOA rules, assumptions, claims, and warnings. I read every post, then added the screenshots to the file. Keep collecting them, I said. Maria nodded. She's getting bold. I know. Think she'll stop? I looked at the growing stack of papers. No. That was the problem. Brenda believed she was winning, and people who think they're winning rarely stop pushing. 2 days later, I learned she wasn't targeting only me. I was fixing a dock ladder when an older man named Frank Holloway pulled into the property. He lived inside Lakeside Ridge. Retired electrician. Quiet guy. We'd talked maybe a dozen times in 10 years. He climbed out of his truck holding an envelope. Got a minute? Sure. He handed me the letter. Another HOA notice. This one cited a landscaping violation. Fine amount, $2,700. The problem? The violation didn't exist. Even Frank knew it. They said my fence is non-compliant. I looked at the attached photograph. His fence wasn't visible. Only bushes. I handed it back. Appeal it. I did. What happened? He laughed. They denied the appeal before the hearing. That caught my attention. Before? 3 days before. I stared at him. Who signed it? Frank pointed to the bottom. Brenda Whitmore. Of course. He folded the paper. She's done this to 5 people already. 5. Maybe more. Interesting. Very interesting. The story was getting bigger, not because of my cabins, because Brenda had started believing nobody would challenge her, and that kind of confidence creates mistakes. The biggest mistake came at the end of the 2nd week. A certified letter arrived. This one wasn't a warning. It wasn't a notice. It wasn't a request. It was a demand. The HOA formally notified me that failure to submit to board authority could result in immediate legal action. The language was stronger, more aggressive, more certain. Exactly what Martha had predicted. I read it twice, then placed it carefully inside the evidence file. By now, the folder contained inspection reports, photos, violation notices, social media posts, witness statements, threat letters. Every piece of paper moved the same direction, toward one conclusion. Brenda wasn't enforcing rules, she was manufacturing authority, and she was putting it in writing. That evening, I drove past the Lakeside Ridge clubhouse on my way home. The parking lot was packed. Board meeting night. Through the windows, I could see Brenda standing at the front of the room, confident, smiling, talking with homeowners, acting like she already owned everything she wanted. The cabins, the lakefront, maybe even the road. I kept driving, because my fight wasn't tonight. Not yet. People like Brenda usually make their biggest mistakes when they think nobody is resisting. And next week, she was planning something bigger. A public HOA meeting, one where she intended to make an example out of me. The notices had already gone out. The agenda had already been posted. And according to the letter sitting on my passenger seat, Brenda Whitmore planned to announce new enforcement actions against all 15 of my cabins. What she didn't know was that I planned to attend. And before that meeting ended, I was going to ask her 3 very simple questions. Questions she would answer in front of everyone. Questions she would regret answering for the rest of this fight. Because while Brenda thought she was building a case against me, she was actually building one for me. The HOA meeting started at 7 o'clock sharp. By 6:30, the clubhouse parking lot was nearly full. Pickup trucks, SUVs, golf carts. People came because they were curious. Some came because they supported Brenda. Others came because they wanted to watch a fight. I parked near the back and walked inside carrying nothing except my phone and a small notepad. No folders, no documents, no lawyer. I wanted Brenda comfortable. Comfortable people talk too much. The clubhouse was louder than usual. Groups stood around discussing fines, landscaping rules, and rumors about my cabins. A few people nodded when they saw me. Others looked away. At the front of the room, Brenda Whitmore stood behind a folding table reviewing papers. She looked up, saw me, and smiled. The same smile she'd worn on my porch. The smile of someone expecting surrender. I took a seat near the middle of the room. Then I opened my phone. The recording application was already running. Montana is a one-party consent state. I was part of the conversation. Everything said tonight would be preserved. At 7 o'clock, Brenda stepped to the microphone. The room quieted. She thanked everyone for attending, reviewed several routine agenda items. Then came the reason most people were there. My name. As many of you know, she began, the board has been investigating ongoing compliance concerns involving the Walker Lake cabins. Several heads turned toward me. I remained still. Brenda continued. The board has determined that the property falls under HOA Oversight Authority and has failed to comply with community requirements for years. She lifted a packet of papers. The amount currently owed exceeds $98,000. A few people gasped. Exactly the reaction she wanted. She talked for nearly 10 minutes. Violation notices, fees, board authority, compliance actions, potential liens. Every sentence pushed further than the last, and every sentence was being recorded. Then she delivered the announcement she'd clearly rehearsed. Unless immediate corrective action is taken, the board intends to file liens against all 15 structures. Applause broke out from several board supporters. Not everyone joined. I noticed that. Some people looked uncomfortable. Others looked confused. One older woman in the second row frowned at Brenda instead of me. Interesting. Brenda waited for the applause to end. Then she looked directly at me. Mr. Walker, would you like to respond? The room went silent. This was the moment she'd been building toward. The public humiliation, the forced defense, the emotional reaction. Instead, I stood slowly and slipped my hands into my pockets. I have 3 questions. Brenda smiled. Go ahead. Question 1. Does the HOA claim authority over my 15 cabins? Yes. The answer came immediately. No hesitation, no caution. I wrote it down. Question 2. Does the HOA claim authority over the road used to access those cabins? A slight pause. Then Brenda nodded. The road serves the community. Yes, several people murmured agreement. I wrote that answer down too. Question 3. I looked directly at her. Has the board reviewed the original recorded access agreement connected to that road? For the first time all evening, Brenda hesitated. Only for a second. Then she waved a dismissive hand. We don't need to review historical paperwork to enforce current HOA authority. The room remained quiet. I could practically hear Martha Collins laughing somewhere. I nodded once. That's all. A few people looked confused. Brenda looked surprised. She'd expected an argument, a confrontation, maybe even anger. Instead, I sat down. Nothing more. No defense, no speeches, no objections. Just 3 questions, 3 answers, and a recording. Brenda recovered quickly. She interpreted my silence the way she interpreted everything, as weakness. As I was saying, she continued confidently, the board intends to proceed with enforcement. The meeting moved on. Budget discussions, committee reports, landscaping proposals. I barely listened. The only part that mattered was already sitting safely on my phone. 40 minutes later, the meeting adjourned. People stood and began leaving. Several homeowners approached Brenda to congratulate her. Others left without saying much. I headed toward the exit. I was halfway across the parking lot when someone called my name. Mr. Walker. I turned. The older woman from the second row was hurrying toward me. She looked nervous. My name's Linda Harper. I recognized her vaguely. Lived somewhere near the subdivision entrance. Can I help you? She glanced back toward the clubhouse, then lowered her voice. Brenda's been doing this to other people. That got my attention. How many? More than you'd think. She took a folded document from her purse. My husband and I paid almost $6,000 in fines last year. I looked down. Fence violations, repeated penalties, no supporting language from the governing documents. Interesting. Very interesting. You appealed? 3 times. What happened? Board denied every appeal. She laughed bitterly. Brenda chaired all 3 hearings. I folded the paper and handed it back. Keep every document. She studied me for a moment. You aren't worried, are you? I looked toward the clubhouse, toward Brenda. Still smiling. Still shaking hands. Still convinced she'd won. No, I said. Linda followed my gaze. Then she smiled for the first time. Good. Before leaving, she said something I thought about the entire drive home. People like Brenda eventually forget they're supposed to follow the rules too. Back at the ranch house, I sat behind my desk and replayed the recording. 3 questions, 3 answers. Exactly what I needed. I saved the file, then backed it up twice. Once to my computer, once to an external drive. When I finished, I opened the road agreement again, read the same paragraph Martha had shown me, then listened to Brenda's answers one more time. The connection was impossible to ignore. By claiming authority over my land and road in a public meeting, Brenda had just stepped onto dangerous ground. Ground she didn't even know existed. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the ceiling. For weeks, the HOA had been building pressure, sending letters, threatening fines, driving away guests. But tonight, something changed. The first real mistake had finally been made. And if Brenda kept pushing, bigger mistakes were coming. The question was no longer whether she would overreach. The question was how far she was willing to go before someone stopped her. 3 days later, I got my answer. The call came from Maria Santos, and she sounded terrified. Mr. Walker, they're here. I was in town picking up supplies for cabin 11. I immediately pulled into a parking lot. Slow down. Who's here? The HOA. My grip tightened on the steering wheel. What are they doing? There was a pause. Then Maria answered. They're changing the locks. For the first time since this started, I felt genuine anger. Not because of the locks, because someone had finally crossed the line between paperwork and property. Which cabins? 3, 7, 12, 14. I looked at the clock. 9:26 a.m. When did they arrive? About 20 minutes ago. Are they still there? Yes. I took a breath, then another. Getting angry now wouldn't help. Maria, listen carefully. Okay. Stay away from them. I am. Do not argue with anyone. I won't. Just tell me one thing. What? Are the security cameras recording? A brief pause. Then relief entered her voice. Yes. Good. Very good. I started driving. Not fast, not recklessly, just directly. Because whatever happened next needed to stay clean. Legally clean. Emotionally clean. Factually clean. The ranch came into view 22 minutes later. Maria's car was parked beside cabin 1. She was standing near the porch waiting for me. I stepped out. Where are they? Gone. Of course they were. People like Brenda rarely stayed around once the cameras mattered. Maria handed me several sheets of paper. Bright yellow notices. Property under HOA management. Unauthorized entry prohibited. Each notice carried the HOA logo, and each had been stapled directly into cabin doors. I walked to cabin 3 first. New lock, new deadbolt, fresh drill marks around the frame. The original lock cylinder lay in the dirt, exactly where the contractor had dropped it. The same thing waited at cabin 7. Cabin 12, cabin 14. 4 cabins, 4 lockouts. 4 acts the HOA had absolutely no authority to perform. Maria looked furious now. Can they do this? No. Then why did they? I picked up one of the broken lock cylinders. Because they think nobody will stop them. Then I headed toward the office. The security system monitor was already running. I opened the recordings, and there they were. Brenda, clear as day. A white contractor van. A man carrying tools. Another carrying a clipboard. The timestamp showed everything. 9:03 a.m., vehicles arrive. 9:07 a.m., contractor approaches cabin 3. 9:09 a.m., drill comes out. Lock removed. Brenda watches. 9:11 a.m. The yellow notice gets stapled to the door. Then the process repeats. Again, and again, and again. At cabin 7, Brenda actually points toward the lock while talking to the contractor. At cabin 12, she holds the notice herself. At cabin 14, she stands directly in front of the camera for nearly 10 seconds. No ambiguity, no confusion, no misunderstanding. The footage captured everything. I watched it twice, then downloaded every file. 1 copy to the ranch computer, 1 to an external drive, 1 to cloud storage, 3 backups, because evidence only matters if you keep it. Jake arrived 20 minutes later. I showed him the footage. His reaction was immediate. She's out of her mind. Maybe. No. Seriously. He pointed at the screen. That's criminal. The word hung in the air. Maybe it was. Maybe it wasn't. That wasn't my job to decide. But it was definitely unauthorized. And it was definitely documented. I pulled out my phone. Who are you calling? The sheriff. Jake looked surprised. You're actually doing it? Not for an arrest. What then? I paused. Because this mattered. Paperwork. He started laughing. The same way Martha had laughed. The same way my father probably would have laughed. Half an hour later, I was speaking with the county dispatch center. I explained exactly what happened. No exaggeration. No opinions. Just facts. Property owner. Unauthorized lock changes. Recorded evidence. Requesting a deputy. The dispatcher listened carefully, then promised someone would be there soon. By noon, the deputy arrived. Cole Ramsey, mid-30s, professional, calm, the kind of officer who listened before speaking. I led him through everything, The deeds, the cabin records, the security footage, the yellow notices, the damaged locks. Cole watched every minute of video, then watched it again. When the final clip ended, he leaned back in his chair. "Mr. Walker, do you know these people?" "I know Brenda Whitmore." He nodded. "The HOA president." "That's right." Cole looked at the screen one final time, then closed his notebook. What they did today wasn't authorized by any court order I've ever seen. That was the first shift. Small, but important. Not a victory. Not yet. Just recognition. Reality finally entering the record. For the next hour, Cole photographed everything. The locks, the notices, the doors, the footage. Then he completed an official report. Case number included. Date included. Names included. Paperwork. Exactly what I wanted. As he prepared to leave, Cole handed me a copy. "You planning to take this further?" I looked toward the cabins, toward the notices still hanging from the doors, toward the evidence Brenda had gifted me. "Yes." Cole nodded. "Good." Then he said something that stayed with me long after he drove away. People usually get themselves in the most trouble right after they convince themselves they're untouchable. That evening, I sat alone in the ranch office. The sheriff's report rested beside the road agreement. The security footage sat safely backed up in 3 locations. The evidence file was thicker than ever. And for the first time, I wasn't just defending myself. I was building momentum. Because the locks weren't Brenda's victory. They were her mistake. And tomorrow, Rachel Pierce would arrive. When she saw what was buried inside the old road agreement, everything was going to change. Rachel Pierce arrived at the ranch the next morning carrying a legal pad and a laptop. She had spent 20 years handling land use disputes, easement fights, and property rights cases across Montana. More importantly, she understood something many attorneys didn't. A case is usually won long before anyone enters a courtroom. I spread everything across the dining table. The HOA notices, the lien threats, the meeting recording, the security footage, Deputy Cole Ramsey's report, and finally, the old road agreement. Rachel started reading. For nearly 40 minutes, she barely spoke. Every few pages, she made notes. Every few pages, she highlighted something. When she reached the road agreement, she stopped. Then she read it again. That got my attention. "You found it." She looked up. "Oh, I found it." For the first time since arriving, Rachel smiled. Not because the situation was funny, because it was clear, very clear. She tapped the agreement. "Do you know what your biggest advantage is right now? The road? No." She tapped Deputy Ramsey's report. "The fact that you haven't overreacted. That wasn't the answer I expected." Rachel leaned back. "Brenda wants a fight." I figured. Good. Don't give her one. She organized the documents into separate stacks. Evidence, witnesses, property ownership, HOA actions. Every pile told the same story. The HOA had assumed authority first and looked for justification later. Legally, that was dangerous. Then she reached the meeting recording. I played the section with my 3 questions. Rachel listened carefully. Once, then twice. When it ended, she wrote something in large letters across her legal pad. Admission of authority claim. "That's important?" I asked. "It's extremely important." She pointed to the road agreement. "The trigger language matters." I nodded. I knew exactly which clause she meant. The same clause Martha had shown me. The same clause Brenda had unknowingly stepped toward. Rachel closed the folder. "Before we do anything, I want certified copies of every recorded document." "That's easy enough." I also want proof of every HOA action. I slid another folder across the table. Inside were screenshots from homeowners, violation notices, appeal denials, emails, Linda Harper's documents, Frank Holloway's fine notices. Rachel reviewed them one at a time. The pile kept growing. So did her expression. This is bigger than your cabins, I know. The board has been operating like nobody would ever challenge them. That's what it looks like. Rachel nodded. And people like that usually leave a paper trail. By afternoon, we had assembled a timeline. Every letter, every threat, every fine, every inspection, every public statement, everything pointed in one direction: escalation. Brenda wasn't slowing down. She was accelerating. Then Rachel asked a question I hadn't considered. How many homes are inside Lakeside Ridge? 96. She wrote the number down. And every one of them uses your road? Every one. Rachel stared at the agreement for several seconds. Then she said something that changed the atmosphere in the room. When this becomes public, the homeowners are going to panic. Not because they were bad people, not because they supported Brenda, because most of them probably believed the HOA actually owned what it claimed to own. They didn't know what was sitting in front of us. Neither did Brenda. Yet. As evening approached, Rachel packed her notes. Before leaving, she handed me a short list. County records, ownership certifications, historical filings. A few additional documents she wanted pulled before making any move. I looked down the page. What's next? Rachel paused at the doorway. Right now, yeah? We wait. That sounded familiar. Martha had said the same thing. So had my father years ago. Let people commit to their mistakes. Then she added one more sentence. And if Brenda files another claim, call me immediately. Why? Rachel looked back toward the road agreement lying on the table. Because the next document she files might be the one that changes everything. That night, I sat alone in the office. Deputy Ramsey's report sat beside the growing evidence file. Rachel's notes rested on top. The case was becoming stronger, more organized, more dangerous. Not for me, for the HOA. Outside, headlights moved along the access road toward Lakeside Ridge. Residents going home, families having dinner, people living normal lives. Most of them had no idea that the road beneath their tires was now at the center of a legal fight that could affect every house in the subdivision. I looked at the agreement one more time, then closed the folder. Because the next chapter wasn't going to be written by me. It was going to be written by Brenda Whitmore. And sooner or later, she was going to make the filing that activated everything. She did it 6 days later. Rachel called me at 8:14 on a Tuesday morning. The moment I answered, I could hear excitement in her voice. She filed. I set down my coffee. What exactly? A formal jurisdiction claim. That got my attention. Rachel continued. County records. Filed yesterday afternoon. Signed by Brenda. Filed on behalf of the HOA. I was already reaching for my truck keys. What does it say? It says Lakeside Ridge exercises authority over your cabins, shoreline structures, and access infrastructure. Access infrastructure. The road. There it was, in writing, filed with the county. Exactly what Rachel had been waiting for. Exactly what Martha had warned about. Exactly what the old agreement addressed. I drove into town immediately. Rachel was waiting at the county records office with a certified copy. She slid the document across the table. I read every page, then read it again. No ambiguity, no misunderstanding. The HOA wasn't suggesting authority anymore. They were officially claiming it. Rachel tapped the signature line. That's your trigger. The room went quiet. For weeks, the agreement had been potential energy. Now it wasn't. Now it was active. I opened the old road agreement and turned directly to the clause both of us knew by memory. The language was simple. Any formal claim of authority, ownership, jurisdiction, or adverse interest against adjoining Walker property immediately triggered termination rights under the road license. Not suspension, not review, termination. Brenda had done exactly what the agreement prohibited. Rachel smiled. She activated it herself. I thought about that for several seconds. All the letters, all the fines, all the threats, all the meetings. The entire fight had been moving toward this moment, and Brenda had walked straight into it. What happens now? I asked. Rachel opened her notebook. Now we prove ownership. For the next 2 days we worked, not emotionally, not publicly, methodically. Every document connected to the road came out of storage. Original surveys, property plats, tax records, construction permits, maintenance invoices, historical maps. The deeper we dug, the clearer everything became. The road never belonged to the subdivision. Not once, not even briefly. The HOA had simply inherited permission to use it. Permission everyone mistakenly assumed was ownership. By Thursday afternoon, Rachel had assembled a complete chain of evidence. Then came the part that changed the entire story. The homeowner list. 96 addresses, 96 families, 96 households whose daily lives depended on that road. I stared at the list. Teachers, retirees, small business owners, families, people who had never attended an HOA meeting, people who probably had no idea what Brenda had been doing. Rachel noticed my expression. They aren't your enemy. I know. Brenda is. She was right. Most homeowners hadn't tried taking my cabins. Most homeowners hadn't filed false claims. Most homeowners were about to become collateral damage in a fight they never started. Which made what came next even more important. Friday morning, Rachel returned carrying a draft document. Formal notice of revocation. The title alone felt heavy. She placed it on my desk. Read it. I did. Carefully. Every line cited evidence. Every line cited ownership. Every line cited the triggering event. And every line followed the agreement exactly. 30 days. That was the notice period. 30 days before access rights terminated. Legally. Automatically. I looked up. You're serious? Very. What happens when they receive this? Rachel didn't hesitate. Panic. The word felt accurate, because for the first time, the consequences weren't abstract. The consequences were driveways, school routes, emergency vehicles, deliveries, access to 96 homes. Everything flowed through that road. Everything. The same afternoon, Martha Collins stopped by the ranch. Rachel showed her the filing. Martha read it once, then laughed. Not because it was funny, because she couldn't believe Brenda actually signed it. I told you she would overreach. Rachel nodded. So did I. Martha handed the filing back. This is the kind of mistake people make when nobody has ever told them no. That evening, we finalized everything. Certified copies, supporting records, ownership documentation, the revocation notice, every page organized, every statement verified, every date confirmed, no shortcuts, no exaggerations, just facts. When the package was complete, Rachel stacked the papers neatly, then looked at me. Ready? I glanced toward the road outside. A stream of vehicles moved toward the subdivision. People heading home from work. People completely unaware of what Brenda had triggered. I thought about the cabins, the lockouts, the lien threats, the public humiliation. Then I thought about the agreement, the one document nobody bothered to read. "Yeah," I said quietly. "I'm ready." The next morning we mailed everything, not just to the HOA, to every homeowner in Lakeside Ridge. 96 certified envelopes, 96 copies, 96 warnings. And inside every envelope was the same sentence. The road access license serving Lakeside Ridge has entered formal revocation proceedings. 30 days remained. By this time next month, every homeowner in the subdivision would know something Brenda Whitmore still didn't fully understand. The road she claimed belonged to the community never belonged to them at all. The first calls started arriving the following afternoon. Not to Brenda, to me. I knew the certified letters had been delivered because my phone began vibrating every few minutes. The first caller was confused. The second was worried. The third sounded angry. By evening, it had become clear something much bigger was happening. People were finally reading the documents, really reading them. Not HOA newsletters, not Facebook posts, not board announcements, actual recorded agreements, the same paperwork Brenda should have reviewed before starting this fight. A retired teacher named Helen Mercer called just before dinner. "I received your letter." "Okay." There was a pause. Then she asked the question everyone else was asking. "Is this real?" I looked at the copy of the agreement sitting on my desk. "Yes." Another pause. Longer this time. Then came the second question. "The HOA never owned the road?" "No." I could hear papers rustling on her end. "My husband and I bought our house 12 years ago." "I understand. They told us the HOA maintained everything. They maintained parts of it, but not the road." "No." Silence. Then she thanked me and hung up. She wasn't the last. By nightfall, 23 homeowners had called. The next morning, the subdivision exploded. Maria was the first to tell me. She walked into the office holding her phone. "Have you seen this?" The Lakeside Ridge community Facebook page was in full meltdown. Hundreds of comments, arguments, questions, screenshots. People posting photographs of the documents. People demanding explanations. People tagging Brenda directly. One homeowner had highlighted the clause that triggered revocation and posted it in bold red text. Another had uploaded county maps showing the road crossing my property. A third demanded an emergency HOA meeting. The comments were brutal. When did the board know? Why weren't homeowners informed? Is this true? Who reviewed the agreement? Why are we losing access? Who authorized this? The same question appeared again and again. Who authorized this? Everyone knew the answer. Brenda Whitmore. Around noon, Jake came into the office carrying a printed screenshot. "You need to see this." It was a statement posted by Brenda. Short, confident, dismissive. "The board is reviewing misinformation recently distributed by Mr. Walker. Residents are advised not to panic." I read it twice, then handed it back. "That's a mistake." Jake smiled. "Thought you'd say that." The problem wasn't that Brenda responded. The problem was that she still thought she controlled the narrative. She didn't. The documents controlled it now. Facts had entered the conversation, and facts were winning. The next day, things got worse for her. 3 homeowners visited the ranch together. Helen Mercer, Frank Holloway, Linda Harper. None of them arrived angry at me. They were angry at the HOA. We sat around the dining table while Rachel joined by speakerphone. For nearly an hour, they asked questions. Who owned the road? How long had the agreement existed? Could the HOA fix this? Rachel answered carefully. Everything depended on what happened next. Then Helen asked the question nobody wanted to ask. If the 30 days expire? Rachel didn't interrupt. Helen finished the sentence herself. What happens? Rachel's answer was honest. The license terminates. The room became very quiet. Nobody liked hearing it. Not even me. Frank rubbed a hand across his face. My grandchildren live here. I know. Linda shook her head. This isn't what any of us wanted. No, I said. It isn't. And that was the truth. I never wanted homeowners caught in the middle. The fight had always been with Brenda, not with 96 families. Before they left, Helen stopped near the door. Can I ask something? Sure. If Brenda backs down, can this be fixed? I thought about the question, then looked toward Rachel's voice coming from the speakerphone. She answered first. Legally, yes. Helen nodded slowly, then left. The moment the door closed, Rachel spoke. She's scared. They all are, as they should be. I knew she was right. The legal consequences were real now. Not theoretical, not hypothetical, real. And Brenda still wasn't stopping. 2 days later, she proved it. Rachel called me shortly after sunrise. Her voice was calm. Too calm. She's filed again. I stood immediately. What now? A court petition. I froze. For several seconds, I said nothing. Then Rachel continued. She's asking a judge to enforce HOA jurisdiction over your cabins. The room felt different instantly. Heavier, more serious, because everything had changed. The fight was no longer happening through letters and meetings. Now it was heading toward a courtroom, toward evidence, toward testimony, toward a judge. And somewhere inside a courthouse file sat Brenda Whitmore's second formal claim of authority over property she didn't own. Exactly the kind of filing that made the old agreement even more powerful. I looked out the office window toward the access road. Cars moved steadily toward the subdivision. Families heading home, completely unaware that their future access was now tied to a court hearing. Rachel broke the silence. The hearing date is set. When? 2 weeks. I nodded slowly. The waiting was over. The evidence was assembled. The filings were complete. And in 14 days, Brenda Whitmore would have to defend every claim she'd made in front of a judge, with the original road agreement sitting on the other side of the courtroom. The hearing was scheduled for 2 o'clock on a Thursday afternoon. By 1:30, the hallway outside the courtroom was already crowded. Homeowners from Lakeside Ridge lined the benches. Some looked nervous. Some looked angry. Most looked confused. The certified letters had forced them to learn more about property law in 2 weeks than they had learned in the previous 20 years. Rachel and I arrived early. She carried 2 organized binders. Nothing dramatic, nothing flashy, just evidence. The strongest cases usually looked boring until the moment they weren't. Brenda arrived 10 minutes later. The moment she entered the hallway, conversations stopped. She wore the same navy blazer she'd worn when she came to my cabins. The same confident expression, the same certainty. Behind her walked the HOA attorney, a man I had never met. He looked prepared. He also looked like someone who hadn't seen every document. That mattered. At exactly 2 o'clock, the bailiff opened the courtroom doors. Everyone filed inside. Judge Harold Benton took the bench moments later. The hearing began. The HOA attorney stood first. For nearly 15 minutes, he outlined the board's position. The cabins benefited from community resources. The lake created shared interests. The HOA possessed authority through long-standing governance practices. The property should be subject to compliance review. Brenda sat quietly beside him, occasionally nodding, occasionally writing notes. occasionally glancing toward me. Every time she did, I noticed the same thing. She still believed she was winning. When the HOA attorney finished, Judge Benton turned toward Rachel. "Ms. Pierce?" Rachel stood, calm, prepared, exactly as she had been throughout the entire case. "Your Honor, before discussing any alleged authority, we need to establish whether the HOA possesses legal jurisdiction over Mr. Walker's property at all." The judge nodded. "Proceed." Rachel approached the bench. First came the property deeds, then the surveys, then the county plats. Every document confirmed the same fact. The cabins belonged to me. The shoreline belonged to me. The road belonged to me. The judge reviewed each document carefully. The courtroom remained silent. Then Rachel introduced the recording from the HOA meeting, the one where Brenda answered my 3 questions. The judge listened. The room listened. Brenda listened. The recording ended. Rachel spoke. "These are voluntary admissions made by the HOA president." The judge made a note. Then Rachel introduced Deputy Cole Ramsey's report. Unauthorized lock changes, unauthorized notices, unauthorized entry. Again, the judge reviewed every page. Again, the courtroom remained quiet. The atmosphere had changed. People could feel it. Then Rachel reached for the final binder, the one that mattered most. The road agreement. She placed it before the judge. For the first time all afternoon, Brenda's attorney leaned forward. Really forward. As if seeing something unexpected, Rachel opened directly to the key section. "The HOA's entire claim relies upon authority over adjoining property and access infrastructure." The judge nodded. Rachel continued. "This agreement governs access to the only road serving Lakeside Ridge." The attorney beside Brenda frowned, then reached for his own copy. Rachel highlighted the clause. The one nobody had bothered reading. The one hidden inside decades-old paperwork. The one Brenda activated herself. Judge Benton spent nearly 2 full minutes reviewing the language. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. The silence became heavy. Then the judge looked up. "Counselor," he said to the HOA attorney, "is this authentic?" The attorney swallowed. "Appears to be, Your Honor." "Appears." Not exactly the answer Brenda wanted. The judge continued reading. Then he looked toward the HOA table. "Ms. Whitmore, did your board review this agreement before filing jurisdiction claims?" Brenda opened her mouth, then closed it. For the first time since this started, she looked uncertain. The judge waited. Eventually she answered, "No." The single word changed everything. I saw homeowners exchange looks. I saw Rachel write a note. I saw Brenda's attorney slowly lower his eyes toward the table. The judge returned to the document. "According to this agreement, your filing triggered termination rights." The attorney stood immediately. "Your Honor, we'd like a brief recess." The request came too quickly, too urgently. Judge Benton granted 10 minutes. The moment the recess began, the courtroom exploded into whispers. Homeowners pulled out phones. Conversations erupted. Questions spread through the gallery. Meanwhile, Brenda and her attorney disappeared into the hallway. The attorney looked furious. Brenda looked pale. Rachel didn't say a word. She simply organized her papers and waited. 10 minutes later, everyone returned. The attorney stood again. His confidence was gone. "Your Honor, after reviewing the documents, the HOA wishes to withdraw its jurisdiction claims." A murmur swept through the room. The judge raised an eyebrow. "Withdraw?" "Yes, Your Honor." The judge looked toward Rachel. She stood. We object unless the withdrawal includes dismissal with prejudice and removal of all liens, notices, and related claims. The judge considered it, then nodded. Granted. Brenda looked like she'd been punched in the stomach. Not physically, legally. Everything she'd spent weeks building had collapsed in less than 30 minutes. But Rachel wasn't finished. She introduced the final pieces of evidence. The lock change footage, the deputy's report, the pattern of HOA enforcement, the documentation collected from other homeowners. Not enough for a full ruling on every issue. Enough to establish a pattern. Enough to justify referrals. Enough to create consequences. Judge Benton reviewed the final packet, then spoke. All HOA jurisdiction claims against Mr. Walker's property are dismissed. Silence. The recorded liens are ordered removed. More silence. The road revocation notice remains valid, subject to the agreement terms. Now the silence became shock. Because the homeowners understood what that meant. The judge wasn't canceling the road issue. The road issue was real, and it existed because Brenda created it. Finally, the judge closed the file. This matter is concluded. The gavel struck. Just like that. The case was over. But the consequences were only beginning. As people filed out of the courtroom, nobody approached me. Nobody argued. Nobody blamed me. Instead, they looked at Brenda. And for the first time since this started, so did everyone else. Because now they understood exactly who had created the problem, and exactly who would be forced to answer for it. The fallout started before the courthouse parking lot was empty. By that evening, Lakeside Ridge homeowners were demanding answers, not from me, from Brenda. The emergency HOA meeting happened 3 days later. I wasn't invited. I didn't need to be. Half the subdivision called me afterward. According to Helen Mercer, the meeting lasted nearly 4 hours. According to Frank Holloway, it felt even longer. According to Linda Harper, it ended with people standing in line to speak against the board. For the first time, homeowners weren't asking what I had done. They were asking what Brenda had done. That difference changed everything. A week later, Brenda Whitmore resigned. The official statement cited personal reasons. Nobody believed it. 2 other board members resigned within 48 hours. Several committee chairs followed. The organization that had seemed untouchable only a month earlier suddenly looked fragile. The legal consequences moved next. The county formally removed every lien and compliance notice connected to my cabins. Rachel sent me copies the same afternoon. I added them to the evidence file. Then I added one more document. Judge Benton's dismissal order. The stack had become thick enough that it barely fit inside the original metal box. The same box my father left behind. The same box Brenda never knew existed. 2 weeks after the hearing, Deputy Cole Ramsey stopped by the ranch. Not for an investigation. For coffee. We sat on the porch of Cabin 4. The same porch where this entire mess began. "Looks quieter," he said. "It is." He nodded toward the subdivision road. "No more inspectors?" "Not lately." Cole smiled. "Funny how that works." Before leaving, he told me something I hadn't heard yet. 3 homeowners had filed formal complaints regarding past HOA enforcement actions. Others were considering the same thing. The pressure wasn't disappearing. It was spreading. Rachel called later that week. The state had begun reviewing financial records connected to the HOA. Nothing dramatic yet. Just questions, requests, audits. But it was enough, because once investigators start asking for documents, people suddenly remember where they left things. And sometimes, they don't like what gets found. The biggest change happened on day 23 of the 30-day revocation period. A delegation from Lakeside Ridge requested a meeting. Not Brenda, not her allies. The homeowners. We met at the community center. For the first time since this started, the conversation wasn't about authority. It was about solutions. Helen Mercer attended. So did Frank Holloway, Linda Harper, several others. And a new face, a retired school principal named David Reynolds. The homeowners had elected him interim HOA president after Brenda's resignation. His first sentence told me everything I needed to know. We'd like to fix this, not fight, not threaten. Fix. Rachel sat beside me and listened. David came prepared. He acknowledged the HOA's mistakes. He acknowledged the court ruling. Most importantly, he acknowledged ownership. The road belonged to me. The cabins belonged to me. The facts weren't up for debate anymore. That changed the tone immediately. For 90 minutes we worked through options: permanent access, future maintenance, liability, emergency services, property rights. By the end of the meeting, we had the framework for a new agreement. A real agreement. Not assumptions, not board interpretations, not imagined authority. Actual recorded rights. Rachel finalized the paperwork over the next week. The homeowners approved it by an overwhelming vote. The new easement protected their access permanently. In return, the HOA acknowledged the road's ownership and agreed to specific limitations on future claims. Everyone signed. Everyone recorded it properly, exactly the way it should have been done years ago. When the final documents were filed, Rachel called me. It's finished. I looked out toward the lake. For the first time in months, there was nothing left to fight. No notices, no threats, no hearings. Just paperwork. Good paperwork. The kind my father always respected. Summer moved forward. The cabins filled again. The guests returned. The families who had canceled bookings began rebooking weekends. Maria stopped worrying every time a vehicle turned into the driveway. Jake stopped photographing inspectors because there were no inspectors left to photograph. Life became normal again. One evening near the end of July, I found myself standing on the porch of Cabin 4, the same porch where Brenda first handed me that orange notice. The cedar railing I'd been repairing still wasn't finished. The project had waded through every threat, every meeting, every court filing, and every legal battle. I picked up my hammer, measured the final piece, and secured it into place. 3 clean strikes. Done. The railing was level again. Funny how much satisfaction can come from finishing something simple. As the sun settled over the lake, I walked back toward the ranch house. The metal box sat open on my desk. Inside were the deeds, the surveys, the court orders, the sheriff's report, the road agreement, and the new easement. I placed the final document inside and closed the lid. This time I didn't lock it. I didn't need to. The fight was over. Outside, a vehicle moved along the road toward Lakeside Ridge. Then another. Then another. Families heading home. Children in back seats. Groceries in trunks. Ordinary people living ordinary lives, using the same road they had always used. The difference was that now everyone understood why. They tried to take my 15 lake cabins. In the end, they nearly lost the only road that could take them home. And that road never needed anger to defend it. Only patience, proof, and the paperwork nobody bothered to read.
If there's one lesson in this story, it's that patience matters just as much as being right. Ethan didn't sell his cabin because he shouted the loudest or pushed the hardest. He sold them because he took the time to understand what he owed, kept good record, followed the law, and stayed calm when it would have been easier to react. Sometimes the strongest position isn't built in the moment of conflict, it's built years earlier through responsibility, reputation, and respect for the truth. And maybe that's what stayed with me most. In the end, this wasn't really a story about a road, a lake, or even an HOA. It was a story about stewardship, about taking care of something entrusted to you, whether that land, family, a business, or a romance made years ago. Real strength isn't always loud. Sometimes it's simply standing your ground with dignity and letting the facts speak for themselves. I'd love to hear what you think. If you ever deal with an HOA, a property dispute, or a situation where good recall make all the difference, drop a yes in the comments. And if you believe patience and repetition still matter in today's world, time stand from below. And if you enjoy stories about ordinary people facing tough situations with determination, common sense, and quiet courage, consider subscribing to the channel. There are plenty more HOA, ranch, and land stories ahead, and we'll be glad to help you along for the journey.